The medical report sat on Alexander's desk like a weight on his chest. 3 pages documenting the injuries his daughter had caused in the past month. 2 nannies bitten so severely they needed stitches. A tutor with scratches down her arm. A housekeeper who'd lost part of her finger. Alexander pressed his palms against his eyes. His daughter was 8 years old and completely feral. Not dramatic tantrums or misbehavior. Truly feral. Like a wild creature that had forgotten how to trust. "We can't continue this way," James said from across the room. His assistant's voice was gentle, but firm. "The staff is terrified. Half won't go near her." "I know." Alexander's voice cracked. "There are facilities that specialize in—" "You're suggesting I institutionalize my daughter?" Alexander looked up sharply. "Lock away an 8-year-old because she's traumatized?" "I'm suggesting we find help we can't provide." James moved closer. "Sophie watched her mother die in that accident while she was trapped in the car. She was alone with the body for hours before emergency services found them. Of course she bites. Of course she's violent. Her whole world became dangerous in one terrible moment." Before Alexander could respond, screaming erupted from the hallway. A woman's frightened voice, then a child's feral snarl. The door burst open. A young housekeeper stumbled through, uniform torn, blood streaming from her arm. Behind her, crouched and ready to attack, was Sophie. The girl looked more animal than child. Her blonde hair was matted and wild. Her blue eyes were unfocused, seeing threats everywhere. Her lips pulled back, showing teeth, hands curved into claws. "Get to the medical wing," Alexander ordered James, his eyes never leaving his daughter. "I'll handle this." When they were alone, Alexander lowered himself slowly to the floor. "Sophie, sweetheart, it's just Daddy. You're safe." Sophie's snarl deepened. Safe was a word without meaning for her. They stayed frozen, like that, for nearly an hour. Eventually, Sophie retreated to a corner and curled into a ball, still watching him with wary eyes. "There's someone," James said quietly when he returned. "I didn't mention her before because it seemed unlikely. But given everything, who?" "A woman named Margot. She works in the estate gardens, keeps to herself mostly. But the head gardener says she has an extraordinary gift with injured animals. Last winter she rehabilitated a dog that had been hit by a car, half mad with pain and fear. She somehow gentled it. My daughter isn't an injured animal." "Isn't she?" James's voice was soft. "Right now, Sophie is operating on pure survival instinct. She's not a child having behavioral problems. She's a wounded creature lashing out at anything that comes close. Maybe she needs someone who understands wounded things." Alexander wanted to argue, but looking at Sophie, still curled defensively in the corner with terror in her eyes, he couldn't deny the truth. "Bring her to me." Margot arrived an hour later, escorted by a servant who left quickly. She kept her eyes down, her posture careful and contained. "Look at me, please," Alexander said. When she raised her eyes, he understood immediately. The left side of her face bore old burn scars, tissue that had healed but would never look quite right. The scarring disappeared under her collar, suggesting extensive damage, but her eyes held his attention. Dark brown, warm, and completely unafraid despite her careful demeanor. She'd learned to move carefully through the world, but underneath there was quiet strength. "You work with injured animals," Alexander said. "I do what I can, sir." Her gaze flickered to where Sophie crouched in the corner. "Is that your daughter?" "Yes, her name is Sophie. She's having difficulties." "I heard she bites." No judgment, just acknowledgement. "Badly. Multiple staff have been injured. I'm running out of options." Margot studied Sophie with calm assessment. The child snarled a warning, but Margot didn't flinch. "May I approach her?" "That's not advisable. She will bite you." "I understand the risk. May I try?" Something in her steady gaze made Alexander nod. "On your own head." Margot moved slowly, each step deliberate. She didn't hide her approach or make herself small. She simply walked toward Sophie with that same calm certainty. Sophie's snarl increased. Her small body tensed, preparing to spring. But Margot didn't run or grab. She stopped about 6 feet away and sat down on the floor. Just sat, not approaching further, not speaking, simply making herself available without demanding anything. Sophie stared, clearly confused. This wasn't how people reacted to her aggression. Margot began humming softly, a melody that sounded like a lullaby. Her posture remained relaxed, unthreatening. She wasn't performing. She was simply present. 10 minutes passed. 15. Sophie's snarl gradually faded. Her body relaxed fractionally, tension easing, from muscles locked tight for months. After 20 minutes, Margot stopped humming. "Hello, Sophie," she said softly. "My name is Margot. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm just going to sit here if that's okay with you." Sophie didn't respond. She hadn't spoken since her mother's death. But her eyes tracked Margot's face, studying her scars with the same intensity Margot had studied her defensive posture. Margot raised her hand slowly, letting her sleeve fall back to reveal more scars, burns that twisted the skin. "I got hurt too," she said simply. "A long time ago. It scared me so much that I stopped trusting anyone. I thought if I let people close, they'd hurt me again." She lowered her arm. "But I learned something. Being scared is okay. Being careful is smart. But being alone all the time, that's its own kind of hurt. And sometimes, when you're very careful and very slow, you can find people who won't hurt you." Sophie's hand moved slightly, reaching toward Margot. Not all the way, just a tentative extension that suggested maybe, possibly, she wanted to verify this gentle presence was real. Margot stayed perfectly still. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Sophie crawled forward, just a foot, but closer than she'd willingly been to anyone in months. "That's good," Margot said softly. "You're very brave." Another foot closer. Sophie's hand extended further, trembling. Her fingers touched Margot's scarred arm, testing. When Margot didn't grab or hurt her, she pressed her palm flat against the skin. Margot smiled, and it transformed her face. "Hello," she said again. "It's nice to meet you, Sophie." Alexander watched in stunned silence as his daughter leaned against this scarred woman and closed her eyes. The tension that had held Sophie's body rigid for months melted away, and for the first time since her mother's death, she looked peaceful. "How did you do that?" Alexander's voice was rough with emotion. Margot looked up, still holding perfectly still. "I didn't do anything except let her see that I understand. Sometimes wounded creatures just need to know they're not alone in their pain." "Can you help her? Really help her?" "I don't know," Margot said honestly. "Healing takes time. But I can try, if you'll let me. Whatever you need, you have it. Name your terms. I don't want payment, but I'd need time with her every day. Somewhere quiet where she feels safe. And I'd need everyone else to stay away during our sessions. Just her and me. Done. The private garden behind the house. It's secure and peaceful. When can you start?" "Now, if you'd like." Sophie surprised them both. She stood, keeping one hand fisted in Margot's shirt, and looked at her father. Really looked, making eye contact for the first time in months. There was still fear in her blue eyes, but underneath was something new, something that might have been hope. Over the following weeks, Margot arrived at the garden every morning and stayed until evening. She didn't try to teach or train or fix. She simply existed alongside Sophie. She brought books and read aloud. She brought simple crafts and showed Sophie how to weave grass into baskets. She brought food and ate where the child could see her, proving it was safe. And slowly, incrementally, Sophie began to relax. She stopped snarling when Margot approached. She started following her around the garden like a shadow. She let Margot touch her hair, her hands, gentle touches that proved not all contact was violent. She didn't speak, but she communicated, tugging on Margot's sleeve when she wanted attention, bringing her flowers with the solemnity of offering treasure, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched, When Sophie had bad days and reverted to growling, Margot simply sat at a distance and hummed. When she destroyed their crafts in frustration, Margot helped clean up without judgment. When nightmares made Sophie scream in her afternoon naps, Margot held her until the terror passed. 2 months after that first day, Alexander found them working together on a flower bed, moving with synchronized ease. "She seems better," he observed quietly. "She is better," Margot confirmed. "Still healing, but better." "Because of you." "Because she decided to try trusting again. I just provided a safe space to practice." "She asks about me, doesn't she?" Margot looked up. "Not with words yet, but she draws pictures in the dirt of a tall man with kind eyes. She's trying to rebuild the connection. She just needs it to go slowly. I'll go as slow as she needs." 3 weeks later at dinner, Margot had been invited to join them, as had become custom. Sophie slid off her chair and crossed to where Alexander sat. The girl tugged on his sleeve, and when he looked down, she lifted her arms. The universal gesture, "Pick me up." Alexander's heart stuttered. He lifted his daughter carefully, and Sophie immediately curled against his chest with a content sigh. The first time in months, his daughter had sought comfort from him willingly. Alexander looked at Margot over Sophie's head, and she smiled with such warmth that something shifted in his chest. This woman who'd appeared like an answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to voice. Who'd taken his broken, frightened daughter and gently helped her heal. Who'd somehow, in saving Sophie, started to save him too. He'd been so focused on his daughter's recovery that he hadn't noticed how much lighter he felt these days. How he looked forward to evenings when Margot would join them, bringing stories and quiet observations that showed how well she understood his child. It was complicated, certainly. She was staff, employed to help Sophie. He was her employer, still grieving his wife. But watching Margot gently stroke Sophie's hair while the child dozed against his chest, he couldn't deny what he felt. Gratitude, yes, but also affection, respect, and something that felt like the beginning of love. 4 months after Margot started working with Sophie, the girl spoke her first words. They were in the garden. Margot was reading a story about a brave princess, and Sophie was sprawled in the grass beside her. Alexander had started joining them in the evenings, wanting to be part of these precious moments. Margot reached the part where the princess escaped from danger, and Sophie sat up abruptly. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Then, rusty from disuse, a single word. "Safe." Margot's hands stilled on the book. Alexander stopped breathing. Sophie looked at Margot with solemn eyes. "Safe," she repeated, pointing to her. Then to Alexander. "Safe." Margot set the book down with trembling hands. "Yes," she said, voice thick with emotion. "You're safe with me. With your daddy. You're safe, Sophie." Sophie nodded, satisfied. Then she curled up with her head in Margot's lap and went back to watching butterflies, as if she hadn't just performed a miracle. Alexander met Margot's eyes across the garden and saw his own wonder reflected there. His daughter had spoken. After months of silence, Sophie had found her voice. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Alexander found Margot in the library, returning their book. "You should be celebrating," she said with a small smile. "Your daughter spoke today. I wanted to celebrate with you. You're the one who made it possible." "Sophie made it possible. I just provided the space." "You always give credit to everyone else." Alexander moved closer. "But this was you. Your patience, your understanding. You saved her. You saved us both." Margot ducked her head, uncomfortable with praise. "These past months," Alexander continued, "watching you with Sophie, seeing your kindness and strength, I've developed feelings for you. Strong feelings." Margot's eyes went wide. "Mr. Hartley, you don't mean that. You're grateful, that's all." "I am grateful, but that's not what this is." He reached out slowly, cupping her scarred cheek with gentle fingers. "I'm falling in love with you, Margot. Have been for weeks. and I hope you might feel something for me too." "It doesn't matter what I feel," Margot whispered. "You're my employer. People would talk. They'd say I'm manipulating you." "Let them talk. You're not just anyone, Margot. You're the woman who saved my daughter, who brought light back into our lives." His thumb traced the line of her scar. Reverent. "You're beautiful. All of you, scars included. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice." Tears spilled down Margot's cheeks. "I'm afraid. My past, the people who hurt me, they taught me that wanting things only leads to pain." "Then let me teach you something different. Let me show you that sometimes reaching for happiness actually brings it, that you deserve to be cherished." Margot closed her eyes. Then she leaned into his touch and whispered, "I feel it too. I've been trying not to, but I do. Then let me prove this is real." She opened, her eyes, looking at him with hope and fear mingled. "People will say I'm not worthy of you. Then we'll prove them wrong together." Alexander smiled. "Besides, Sophie has claimed you as hers. And my daughter's choice carries weight in this house." A shaky laugh escaped Margot. "You'd use your daughter's attachment to me as leverage? I'd use every tool available to keep you in my life. Is that so wrong? It's actually kind of sweet." "So, can I court you properly, Margot? Will you give us a chance?" Margot took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yes, but slowly. As slow as you need. We have time." The courtship that followed was patient and careful. Alexander brought flowers Sophie helped pick. He invited Margot on walks through the estate. He asked about her thoughts and dreams, and listened to everything she said. Sophie, meanwhile, thrived. She started speaking more. She stopped being aggressive entirely. She even began attending lessons again, as long as Margot sat nearby. 6 months after Margot had entered their lives, Alexander asked her to marry him during a quiet evening in the garden, where it had all begun. "I love you," he said simply. "Not despite your scars or your past, but with all of it. You're exactly who I want by my side. Will you marry me?" Before Margot could answer, Sophie tugged on her sleeve. "Margot, stay?" she asked, voice clear. "Stay forever?" Margot looked at the child she'd come to love as her own daughter, then at the man who'd somehow healed her wounded heart. "Yes," she whispered. "I'll stay forever." The wedding took place 3 months later in the estate garden. Sophie stood beside them, beaming with pride, wearing a flower crown she'd made with Margot that morning. When the ceremony was done and Alexander kissed his new wife, Sophie threw her arms around them both. "My family," she said clearly, joyfully. And it was true. They were a family built from pain and patience, from trust hard won and love freely given. Years passed. Margot became not just a mother to Sophie, but an advocate for children dealing with trauma. She created programs, opened her home to those who needed healing, and never forgot what it felt like to be broken and alone. Sophie grew into a confident, compassionate young woman who spoke openly about her trauma and recovery, helping others understand that being wounded didn't mean being worthless. Alexander watched his wife and daughter with gratitude every day, thankful for the scarred woman who'd walked into his life and transformed everything. Sometimes on quiet evenings, they'd sit together in the garden where it had all begun, where a frightened child had first trusted a wounded woman, where healing had started for all of them. "Do you ever regret it?" Alexander asked one such evening. "Taking on Sophie when she was at her worst? Taking on me and all the complications?" Margot thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain of her past, yes, but also the joy of her present. "Not once," she said firmly. "Not ever. My scars will always be part of me. But now they're part of a bigger story. One where I went from broken to whole, from alone to surrounded by family." Alexander kissed her gently. "You were never broken. You were wounded, yes. But broken things can't heal themselves the way you did. We healed each other," Margot corrected. "You and Sophie both. You showed me I was worth loving, and I showed you that healing was possible. We saved each other, Sophie found them there, now 18 and nearly grown, but still seeking her parents' presence when the world felt overwhelming. "Can I join you?" she asked, already settling beside Margot. "Always," Margot said, making room. They sat together as stars emerged in the darkening sky. A family that shouldn't have worked, but somehow became exactly what each of them needed. "Tell me the story," Sophie said, as she had countless times before. "About the first day, when you made me feel safe." Margot smiled and began the tale she never tired of telling. About a girl who'd been so frightened she could only communicate through violence. About a woman who'd understood her pain because she carried her own. About a father who'd been willing to try anything to save his daughter. About how sometimes the most broken people find each other, and in the finding become whole. The moon rose over the garden, illuminating 3 figures sitting close together. A family built on second chances, proof that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Sophie had been feral once, biting everyone who came near, until a scarred woman had shown her that some people were safe. That healing was possible if you were brave enough to try. And in teaching Sophie that lesson, Margot had learned it too, had discovered she could open her heart without fear, could build a new life from the ashes of the old. In the house beyond, other families slept peacefully, but in the garden, under the stars, 3 people who'd found each other when they needed it most sat together, safe, whole, home, just as it should be.